In this episode of Property Journal, I'm talking to Benjamin Hall, the founder of Loft, which he started 20 years ago. Loft provides a complete furnishing solution for property professionals, and he's totally open and raw about his own journey in mental health, both in business and also personally. I know you're going to really enjoy this episode. Benjamin, welcome to Property Journal. Tell everyone who Benjamin Joseph is.
I'm Benjamin Joseph. I am the founder of Loft, an interior design business that specialises in furnishing residential accommodation for landlords, property developers. I grew up in central Manchester in the 90s, went to Nottingham University to do a psychology and English language degree, came out of university and started the business with a £15,000 student loan. Noticed a gap in the market that residential accommodation wasn't being furnished to a particularly high standard. I graduated in 2000, so I was there 97 to 2000, and came out of uni and thought, let's try and offer a better quality interior solution for students like me or anybody that was renting a property. That's where I am. And 20 years later, here we are.
So it's providing a need that you spotted was not being done right, not being done well.
Yeah, my dad had a second-hand furniture business, and the plan was to remove the old furniture and he would sell it in his shop and I would provide the new furniture. So it was like a business that was designed to help one another.
Yeah. But
the requirement for second-hand, when businesses like Loft started to sprout up in the early 2000s, second-hand furniture was no longer something that it became just as cost-effective to provide a new furnishing solution than it was to provide second-hand. So, and also, rents were increasing, so residents were looking for better quality interiors, and we managed to sort of catch that wave at the right time. I left Manchester in the year that the IRA bomb went off, and then a huge amount of investment came into the city, and a lot of residential property got built off the back of the investment. I think the government ended up spending around 80 million on the city centre after it got blown up. But it's the best thing that ever happened to Manchester because it had been forgotten completely by the government at the time. Yeah. In the early early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. It was quite a rough city, and it was, but it needed that investment. And then I came back from uni in 2000 and I started the business in 2003.
And that was called Loft from the beginning?
It was called Buy-to-Let Furnishings.
Okay.
So we used to sit there and think to ourselves, how are we ever going to be able to afford to buy a house? And I used to read about property in the newspaper, and then the buy-to-let mortgage came out in the early 2000s, and I called it buy-to-let-furnishings.co.uk. And because of that buy-to-let keyword in the domain, we just started to get lots of traffic. And to that, it was a removal and replacement service, but then we started to sell furniture packages to investors, and it really started to, it motored from day one, really.
Was there much competition at the time? Because furniture, right? So you were pioneering.
We were innovators. There was one or two other businesses. There was nobody in the Northwest doing it. There was David and Philip down here in London. David Phillips, before they got bought out, they were doing a landlord solution. But see, a lot of landlords used to come to I worked in my dad's shop ever since I was 10.
Sure.
And a lot of landlords would buy second-hand furniture for their rental properties because, generally speaking, people wanted to spend as little as possible on their interiors because it was a cost. And then we just started to provide new furniture that was more modern and trendy for city centre apartments that were being built in Manchester that had just never been there before. They've never been residential in the city centre, really.
The actual furniture itself, I know from my own experience of when I've rented a number of units out, the attrition rate, if you like, from a tenant's point of view, not looking after furniture. How have you stress tested that as a model to be able to find furniture that is resilient enough for the rental market?
We balance sort of style, durability, and price point, and because obviously we realise that landlords have a set budget to spend on their interior, but you need to make sure that it's of a certain level of durability and style, and it's difficult to get all three together, but over time, we put the right furniture in depending on what the rental value of the property is. And generally speaking, if you treat a resident badly, they will treat your property badly. But if you treat a resident well, they'll treat your property well. And we don't see that much that many problems really with the furniture than what you'd expect, considering how much furniture we actually sell. You know, we're turning over 16, 17 million quid. It's a lot of furniture at the price point that, you know, our average order value is probably 700, 800 pounds. You know, it's a lot of orders that go out every day. And I think that if you look after your resident, the resident will look after the property. I think that the days of, you know, students being a hassle being in your property has changed, because I think that the culture's changed really of the way people live. It's not as boisterous as perhaps it once was.
Yeah, a bit less partying.
Less partying and just sort of a bit more respect and sort of an understanding that, you know, the landlord has the property. I mean, I've got a few buy-to-lets and a few HMOs with students in there, and the way they communicate with me is impeccable, really, very respectful. And we've made a lot of effort with the property and make sure that it's nice for them and the furniture is good quality, and they look after it. And it's about communication.
No, that resonates. I know from previous experience that if you treat tenants as customers, and with respect, they will look after the property.
Yeah,
and of course, as you say, the opposite is the same.
I think that the sort of the idea around how to treat residents as customers came with that first sort of buy-to-let boom. Yeah, and we sort of, our messaging and our communication was all around that. You know, provide a better quality interior, achieve higher rental yields, improve your retention, and keep your residents happy, rather than treating them like they're, you know, somebody that you know, if you treat somebody badly, they're not going to want to live in your property. No. Yeah. No, I get that totally. Yeah. And so Loft now, as of 2023, how far-reaching do you go around the country? Give us a bit of an idea of just the size of Loft. So, I mean, we started in the early days only supplying Manchester. Sure. And now we're fully nationwide. We're doing stuff from Aberdeen all the way down to Exeter. We have a sort of landlord and agency business, which we supply sort of a replenishment solution in between residential tenancies. And we have a student business, which is predominantly supplying PBSA and some universities. And then we have a residential side, which is for investors, which is mostly packages. And then we're quite sort of prominent in the build-to-rent space as well, because we were there from the very beginning, and we supply some of the biggest PBSA and build-to-rent operators in the UK. Our infrastructure has been designed to support large-scale corporate institutional landlord operations, and we can provide 1 chair or 1,000 chairs with the same amount of sort of enthusiasm. And I think that the company has been built around the progression within the residential space within the UK. So there's 3 different arms, but the brand serves, whether you're an individual landlord or whether you're a corporate landlord, that we have a solution that's fitting.
Right, so you can literally provide for anyone in property that's looking for that soon.
And we don't want to lose, you know, even though build to rent's quite glamorous and there's big numbers involved in it and it's growing, there's a lot of press around it. I think that, you know, landlords today need support. You know, the government haven't been particularly kind to them, and individual landlords and individual investors need the support of a business like Loft. We're an extension of a property professional's portfolio, where tap into our infrastructure, buying capability, warehousing, vans, all of that sort of stuff, and we can react quite quickly. You know, there's guys that come to us, you know, the bank sort of like stopped cash flowing them, but they need to furnish a number of properties to get the rental up to a certain percentage before the next money is released, and we'll help people. We're here to add fluidity to the marketplace.
That's great, good innovation.
Yeah.
How many staff has Loft got?
Today we're around 100. It goes up to around 130-ish in the peak season in the summer, because we're doing a lot of student accommodation, so we employ a lot of temporary labour to help us with the installation. But we settle around 100 staff. It's about 100. So
you founded it, and you've effectively run the business for 20 years.
I've owned it and managed it and cash flowed it for 20 years. Yeah.
I mean, it's commendable.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I don't really know any different, really. No. It's fortunately, you know, the market has continued to grow, and the appetite for talking about interiors and providing an interior solution has grown, and people really enjoy, you know, doing up their property and talking about interior design and furniture's fashion, and you know, we've been able to stay at the forefront of that because we've got some really good people. We've picked up some really good guys along the way that are the cornerstones of the business. You know, we've had some staff that have been with us from the very beginning.
I was going to talk to you about that, and company values as well, because I've spoken to a couple of people in the journey to being able to talk to you today that work for you, who are incredible. They sing the praises of what you've brought as a company ethos and values to Loft, and the fact that you really care about them.
In the early days, we were just amazed that people would turn up to work for us. We were so grateful that they came. We were so busy and so stretched, and we didn't have any money, but we were so sort of grateful for the guys when they turned up and actually delivered the furniture that we asked them to the right address at the right time. That we were just, we realized that we just couldn't do it without them. And a lot of the people and the characters that we've had come through the business along the way, Loft has had an incredibly positive impact on so many people. We've employed probably thousands of people over the years, 20 years now, and it's a lot of people have gone on and become successful in other areas or in a similar sort of business. We've had marriages, we've had children. It's been very positive. I think Loft's original sort of LOFT stood for sort of landlords order furniture today. And I literally sat around the kitchen table with my mum and dad and my brother and just went through a thesaurus and just found the word Loft and said, okay, that's it. And then that sort of transpired. It was buy-to-let furnishings, then it was Loft Interiors, and now it's Loft, and it's one Loft, and it's a registered trademark. And now LOFT stands for our company values, which is love, and the company's been built on love because it's a family business. Opportunity, and that the platform of Loft, if you come and work for Loft or with Loft as a partner or an employee, the opportunity and the platform that Loft provides for you, that opportunity is, you can take that as far as you want it to go. Sure. Future is one that I've put in there because I'm constantly just looking forwards, and I'm not somebody that's caught up in the past. And it's like, let's keep designing something for the future of the marketplace. And then the T stands for together. So love, opportunity, future, together. And the business is very together. It's been difficult to hold it together during the last couple of years of the lockdown and the aggressive media messaging. But the team that we've got now and the people that we've got now and the energy that the company attracts is quite special, to be honest with you. There's not that many businesses that have been independently owned for 20 years without VC money, without PE money, without having to sell equity. And that independence is something that I think that a lot of the employees are quite proud of working for, because the world is just so ridiculously corporate now. It's nice to have an independent business.
Yeah, I bet. And I think following on from that, just in terms of how you've embraced and looked after your staff, and you mentioned lockdown, of course, COVID, I can only imagine that had a huge impact on your business and on the staff. I don't know where you start with that, but I mean, I can imagine from the moment we went into that first week, the decisions you were churning and the...
Well, we were growing at 40% a year.
Okay.
And everybody always says, oh, growth, that's great, well done. Growth is terrifying. It's very, very difficult to manage. We'd grown 40% a year on year for 3 years in a row prior to COVID coming in 2020. And if we'd have carried on growing at that rate, it just would have been totally unsustainable on all of the employees, on me, on the cash flow, on everything. And actually, COVID, in a way, helped us to stop a little bit and take stock and sort of put some systems and processes into the company. But COVID and the lockdown and that period of time of 2 years of on and off lockdowns just decimated the company culture completely. And we were up against the most aggressive media messaging and the most irresponsible sort of British media messaging that I've ever experienced. And as a business owner, fighting against the BBC and Sky News and everything else that was being spoken about, the full spectrum of sort of, conspiracy theory all the way through to, COVID-19, how it came around, what was happening. And I think that the British media and the British government have made it very, very difficult for business owners through their behaviour and through their communications. I think that Rishi Sunak did a great job supporting construction, and the furlough scheme was absolutely necessary, no matter what you actually think about it. If that hadn't have happened, who knows where businesses would have been now.
Yes,
and they had to do something to sort of
Yeah.
support the flow. But the intensity of the lockdowns, the behaviour of the government not following the rules, and the mismessaging around the whole thing basically just made it impossible to run a company with any sort of authority, because all of the personal connections that you had and all of the sort of love energy that had been created over the last sort of 18 years of having the company, suddenly it was like every man for himself. And, that the media were telling employees, you don't have to turn your camera on a VC, you don't have to have your microphone on a VC, it's intrusive, don't work too hard. And there was, you really, really needed everybody to pull together at that time. And we did. I mean, and me being the personality that I was, I wasn't sort of a great believer in the necessity of lockdown. And we'd embarked on a change management program from 2019, putting an ERP system into the company and a new digital ordering platform. And we had an opportunity. Do you want to proceed with this change management program, or do you want to just, put it on ice? And I said, let's do it. In hindsight, it was a lot to ask of people to continue to trade, put the change management program in, which was a fundamental change in the way that we operated and the way that, all of the data that's involved in a business like mine, digital photography, video, customer data, client data, all of the data that needs cleansing and re-putting into a system was a huge ask. And my employees have just been unbelievable with the way that they've been so resilient to focusing on the change management program while all of this noise was going on. But it was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot to ask. And in hindsight, maybe we could have phased it a little bit more differently. But, nobody knew when the lockdown was going to end. Nobody knew,
No.
It was the messaging was so inconsistent that I suppose I just thought to myself, well, let's carry on. To be honest, now in 2023, if we hadn't have done what we did, we would have been left behind. So we're now in a very strong position from a systems perspective, from a data perspective, photography, video, all of our digital assets, everything's, we're coming to the end of a digital transformation, which probably should have taken 1.5 years, but it's taken 3 years, and that's directly because of the distraction of COVID and lockdown.
It's seriously impressive. And the fact that you were able to kind of pivot in that time and make sure that you were making the right decisions that potentially have put you ahead of the competition.
Well, I mean, the people really helped, and they stayed focused, and it was very much we didn't shut because we were supplying key worker accommodation.
Yeah.
So a lot of our guys, especially the operations guys, I mean, the guys that were really taking the risks, the guys that were going into other people's properties and providing furniture, and the guys that were working in the warehouse, and the guys that haven't got their own cars and that were traveling on public transport, and all, the people on the ground kept the company alive. And it was strange because, certain departments that didn't need to come into the office made way more problems for us from a management perspective than the guys that were actually out in, the world, who didn't have the option to work from home. Those guys didn't complain as much as the people that did have to work from home. It's quite interesting, actually.
Interesting. And from a staffing point of view, and the interaction you probably had, and the proximity to those people before COVID to then during and after, have you seen a shift? Has there been, long-term effects of how and
people are jaded. People are tired with it, and obviously, post-COVID, there was a glimmer of hope, and then Putin invades Ukraine, energy prices, fuel prices, inflation. But there was a lot of, in my view, the government was so entirely focused on vaccination that they weren't watching other things that were happening, like the shipping crisis. I mean, we were paying, prior to 2021, we were paying $2,000 to import a 40-foot container to the UK. In 2021, 2022, the price of a shipping container went up to about $18,000 just overnight. The shipping company, the demand was so strong that the shipping companies were charging, astronomical figures to import products, which is this is why inflation is where it's at. Now, the government's could have done more to step in and spoke to these shipping businesses and either subsidized them or, stopped this aggressive price increase, which affected everybody. And, you've seen big businesses like Made.com, big furniture businesses, 300 million turnover businesses. They had a valuation of 800 million, just got bought for 2 million.
And I saw this recently.
Or 3 million.
Terrifying.
It's unbelievable. And this is a direct result of the government they probably had too much to look at and to do, but I think that inflation could have been curtailed a little bit.
Sure.
And I think that, some of the media's attention on sort of, Boris having parties at his house and the leadership campaign and all of that stuff, it just wasn't helpful for the company, the country, wasn't helpful for my company or the country or anybody living in it. I feel like the British media is entirely irresponsible and has created a lot of problems, and these problems will continue for a long time.
Yeah, it's scary to hear that, and unfortunately I have to agree with you. You've talked about the staff, you talked about the effects on the business. What about yourself? In terms of that whole journey, you're running a business, the decision stops with you. You've got to be forward thinking, you're trying to keep everything moving. How did you manage your own mental health during that time?
I was quite fortunate really in the lockdown. My girlfriend was living in Barcelona at the time, and they got locked down about 3 months before the UK. And she was getting fined when she was walking her dog on the street, like €30. So she came back to London and said, look, I think we're going to get locked down. I was still in denial. Oh, we're not going to get locked down. It's fine. And we rented an Airbnb in North Yorkshire and for 2 weeks. And halfway through that 2-week tenure, the country locked down. And I ended up living in the countryside for 6 months. And I'd never spent longer than a week in a rural location. I'm from central Manchester. I'd either lived in central Manchester or central London. I've never really experienced seasons like you do in the countryside. I'd never really reconnected with nature. And I was very, very fortunate that my girlfriend pushed for us to get out of the city when she did. And I was very fortunate that I'm in a position where I was able to stay in an Airbnb up near Darlington for about 6 months. And that gave me the balance. All the meetings were done on VC, which was, relatively efficient. And my guys just carried on in terms of the installation team. They didn't let us down. And, I was very, very fortunate. And I think that had I have been in an apartment, my apartment here in Bloomsbury or the apartment I had in Manchester at the time, I think it would have been a very different story. I think it would have been very, very difficult for me because I'm very hyperactive and I need to burn off energy a lot. I've got a lot of energy that I need to burn off. And being in the countryside, there was no real lockdown because there was just no people. It was just cows and sheep, and you could go for a run or you could go for a cycle and you could burn that energy off. And I was very fortunate, but I genuinely did think it was the end for my company. I didn't think we were going to be able to make it. And then, we were quite fortunate that construction was supported and the furlough scheme came in. And a lot of our customers, realized that actually, residential accommodation, there's still a huge lack of housing, huge lack of accommodation, and they needed to continue building it. So they carried on. And we had a lot of contracts that had been won prior to that lockdown happening. So we were able to continue to furnish properties. I think that the landlord and agency business, the original business, that replenishment solution fell off a cliff because rents actually increased. People stopped moving as much, and that solution in between tenancies wasn't needed. But the build to rent stuff and the student stuff and some of the build to sell stuff carried on. So I think we were lucky, and I think we've come out of it in a stronger position structurally as a team with our systems than we were prior to COVID. So we're fortunate. I think it's important to say that, for the first time ever though, we had to take debt into the business. So I had to take a C-bills and we'd never had any debt in the business before. No. So that unprecedented things going on there for that to ultimately, and at least it was available. It was a lifesaver. I think the government didn't do everything wrong. I think that the government's relationship with the media, their exposure of mistakes rather than positives, just continually pointing out negatives, makes it very difficult.
No, I understand.
For all of us, like, it's just unnecessary.
So following on from what you've just said, the coincidence that you ended up in such a rural environment, that really parallels something that's always come naturally to me, to try and get out amongst nature, get fresh air, fill your lungs up with fresh air and natural surroundings. And if I can, of course, I'll incorporate that with exercise, whether it's a run or a bike ride or just a walk. How important do you think it was to your mental health? And has that something, is that something you've now instilled into your daily or weekly life, about being out in the fresh air, out with nature?
I cannot describe how important that is to somebody that's been living in a city for as long as I've been living in it. I've been living in the city for 40 years. I hadn't really prioritized spending any time in nature. I didn't really understand why I would ever go to the countryside, because there's nothing there. And you get conditioned by the city and the convenience of the city, but then when you do have the opportunity to spend some time in the countryside, it changes your entire perspective and sort of makes you realize that human beings are a byproduct of nature, and without nature we don't exist. And that sort of realization that our existence is the miracle,
sure,
is hugely liberating and takes a lot of pressure off financial forecasting and margins and budgets and managing other people and other people's expectations, because you realize that the most important thing is that your heart keeps beating and you keep breathing and you're alive and you feel connected to something. And I actually set up a business in the lockdown called Live Off Grid, and I actually lived in a converted shipping container in a field for a long period of time in the lockdown, and literally totally reconnected with a natural environment. And like, genuinely, I'm so city, like, I'm from the centre of Manchester, and we'd go to the countryside for the
sure,
day,
yes,
and then come back to the city. Like, you don't spend a long, prolonged period of time, but just, it's a privilege. And there's so much space out there in the countryside, and everybody's cooped up in the city. It's bizarre to me, but when that Airbnb expired, the rent expired, and the world opened up again in the summer of 2020, I immediately rented another place in the countryside and rented everything I had in the city. I kept my place in London and then rented a place in the city, in the country, in Manchester, in Cheshire. I'm very, very fortunate. I found this super rural place, and I can't really imagine not having that in my life anymore.
So long term.
Yeah, and I sort of like, the whole idea behind Off Grid is to try and help people that don't necessarily have the privilege of being able to spend time in the country, give them an opportunity to do so. Because I think that a lot of the frustrations that are created by being in such close proximity with other humans and being under pressure and traffic and busyness and the congestion, it gets on top of us, and we're not necessarily made for the environments that we're choosing to live in. And living in a block of apartments and sort of buying your food once a day from the supermarket, and that sort of life is, I don't think it really sort of feeds our natural spirit. So Live Off Grid is something that I'm trying to do as a rural off-grid co-living community type venture, where we're providing an off-grid, literally solar paneled solution, where you have to light fires to heat water and light fires to heat the container. And something about that sort of whole, like, caveman existence, it actually makes you feel, if you live in a tiny home, if you live in a home that is literally the size of a 20-foot shipping container, suddenly you've got a huge amount more time on your hands, because you've not got the washing up to do, or wash your clothes, or do the ironing, or mess around, like, in the house. You only have enough space to sleep and to cook, and that's it. And it's incredible, really, the impact that it had on me. And it made me completely reprioritize, and it made me realize, I think, that what's an important message from this conversation today that I learned in the lockdown is that you have to separate your personal life and your professional life, because who you are professionally and who you are personally are literally two different things. And as a man growing up in today's society, you've got to be successful, you've got to be good looking, you've got to be charismatic, you've got to be intelligent, you've got to be funny. It's a lot of pressure all the time to be somebody that maybe that you're not. And I think that what the lockdown taught me was that if I lost Loft tomorrow, who would I be?
Yeah.
And would I still be a confident, outgoing human being? Or because a lot of my identity is wrapped up in the brand that is Loft. Loft is unquestionably the coolest brand in the residential space. There's nobody that touches our brand, and that's because it's real and it's authentic and it's owned by real people. It's not owned by a corporate institution that's juicing a loan note. It's just not, that's not how it is. And for me, if I lost that, then, my girlfriend is like super important in this whole journey, because she was like, yeah, it's okay that you own Loft, but I don't want to know that guy. I want to know who are you though without that. And if you can let go and separate your personal life and your professional career, suddenly you become very powerful then, because you can actually let go and you can lose something that you think makes you who you are. But, man made the money, money didn't make the man, sort of thing. You know what I mean? It's like, even though there's so much investment emotionally like caught up in building this company, it actually doesn't really have an impact. It makes you feel in a way like satisfied that you're able to sort of like help people and have an impact. But actually, what would you do if you lost that tomorrow? And that is what I learned from lockdown, that actually, whoa, hang on a minute. I really need to make sure that I'm comfortable with who I am.
Yes. Without
anything. Any material, any clothing, any property, anything like, and Courtney has brought me back to that. And when she does get an opportunity when I'm not working, because I am a workaholic, I'm not gonna lie, sitting down, meditating, going for walks in the countryside, stopping. I think that the biggest skill in life is to sit still and do nothing and be comfortable with it.
Yes.
So go and sit in one of those parks in London, these beautiful parks that the Victorians and the Edwardians put together for us to be social, and sit on a bench without your phone, without any music, without anything, for as long as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Without doing anything, without thinking about anything or anyone, and just be still. And I think that if you can be, the longer that you can be still for every day, the happier that you will be.
Yeah.
It's difficult though, man. And I'm not saying that I'm a professional at it, and I'm not Zen Buddha or anything like that, but I do sit now on the tube, in the park, at home, and try and just bring everything to a still. And I think that's what I learned in the lockdown, basically, because I'd never stopped before that.
No. And following on from that, which you could argue you're almost describing a form of meditation there.
Yeah.
You're really making sure you're in the present, and you're just focusing on yourself at that moment in time, not the business, not the decisions that need to be made. They can be made later. How much time have you made prior to really embracing what you just described in the 20 years of being in business? How much time have you made for meditation, for self-development, reading books, podcasts?
Very little.
Interesting.
Very little, prior to... So I went sober 6 years ago.
Okay.
Prior to becoming sober, I would cope with stress through alcohol and drugs and partying with my friends. That was my coping mechanism. I'm very blessed to have a lot of fun, exciting people in my life. And I think that, I used to equate having a good time with partying.
And when you weren't partying, you were working.
When I wasn't
on
partying, I was
recovering.
When I was partying heavy, and I was working as well, but I was raving hard, and I was in recovery. It takes days to recover. If you go out for 3 days, then it takes 3 days or 4 days to recover, and then you've got to work at the same time. And what I found was I'm not from money, I'm not from a rich family. I didn't go to a private school. It was for me, when my business became successful, it was like the pub is open, the bar is, my credit card didn't run out, and I didn't need to go to the office the next day because I had staff in place. So as a responsibility to myself, I chose to go sober. And when you go sober, you are truly back in touch with your true emotions and your true feelings. I'm not talking about 2 weeks sober or a dry January or whatever people say. I'm talking about actually actually being sober for a prolonged period of time. You know, alcohol particularly is a suppressant of your soul and your true emotion. So like the feeling that I'm having in this situation with you now, I'm embracing that feeling, you know, a little bit nervous, you know, like not, you know, it's not something that I'm shying away from. And I think that as a man, you know, a big guy who's grown up in a big city, you know, like part of your identity is to be somebody who likes a drink or likes to party, like, you know, like, well, and if you don't, then you can be branded as boring or not interesting. The most interesting people I've ever met are sober. Yeah. And the biggest achievement of my entire life is going sober.
Oh, well done you. Well,
yeah.
That's seriously, you know.
Anybody that feels trapped by the social pressure of drinking, you've got to be really careful of like the identity that you create for yourself as a man or as a woman. Because when people sort of like expect to see a certain version of you and you are tired of living up to that identity, it can become exhausting. And actually, this is where a lot of the problems lie with young men who've created this persona to be accepted for external validation, when actually that's not who they really are. No. And I hated drinking by the end of it. I was self-harming with it. It was horrible. Like, I just didn't want to do it anymore, but I didn't know what else to do. And it was like, I need to have a drink just to be able to go out with these people. And I think that you've got to be really careful who you surround yourself with. And, you know, you can make decisions sometimes about business. Sure. Oh, I need to go and hang out with these guys because I'm going to be able to make money out of it. I'm going to be able, my business will do well because of it. But these people could be the opposite of like who you are or what you believe in or what you represent, but you're doing it. And that makes that situation even worse. Totally. I've been in that position at different times in my life, certainly from an entrepreneurial point of view, when you're setting up a business and you're making new relationships. Business development, you know, like with just wine and beer and like people getting drunk, it's just a nonsense. That's the thing, particularly property development, because you're interacting a lot with surveyors, estate agents, lawyers. And at any one time, particularly going back to, kind of call it sort of 2014, 15, 16, there was drinks receptions every night and often lunches put on. You know, constant invites to them, and the first thing you had was a glass of champagne on arrival, and but you were around people that are putting on a show. But just, you know, going back to, you know, literally what you just revealed and the humbleness of that, and the fact that we're literally having this conversation, I think that is a trend that really does seem to be, thankfully, coming into society. I hope so, because I was that guy at the bar buying the champagne. I was that guy, and I didn't know who else to be. And if anybody is out there that feels like trapped by this identity that they've created for themselves, or they don't know how to go to a networking event without drinking, or they don't know how to go to a club without drinking, I'm still partying in Ibiza with at villas sober. Like, you know, I'm you don't have to be high to have a good time, and you don't have to be drunk to meet people or to get on with people. But there's this weird like bond that British people have with one another of let's get absolutely wasted together, and it brings you closer. But a lot of the people that I, you know, was partying with or still I am partying with, you know, have a lot of respect for what I've achieved in terms of my sobriety, and my job now is to help other people to have the strength of character to actually, if you don't want to have that drink, you don't have to do it. And you really don't. And like, if you feel like you are verging on having a drink, just call me. And I've got literally 5 really close friends. I've managed to help them get sober, and they're sober now, and they're living much better lives because of it. And you've got a better friendship as well. For you to offer that, for you to be able to say that, because there's a chance that if you hadn't, they wouldn't have reached out for the very reason we're talking about. Or they're dead. I mean, you know, like you look at Martin Skinner. Martin Skinner was one of the most talented, entrepreneurial, innovative property developers in the whole of London. He was a very close friend of mine, and he died. Like, he OD'd, and it's like he couldn't shed himself of that identity. That's all it is. And this is toxic masculinity. This is what toxic masculinity is, and this is what depression is, and this is what addiction is. You know, you use drugs and alcohol to suppress the anxiety and the depression. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a perfect example. I went sober, and he ended up in Wormwood Scrubs and then died.
I know, that's tragic. I think one of the things that we've touched on that I'm fully embracing is the chance to just talk openly. You know, for you and myself having a chat 5-6 years ago, there was more of a front. I mean, you obviously did sobriety from 7 years, and massive congratulations on that. But I think I've got involved in a company called JAAQ, JAAQ, Just Ask a Question, a mental health platform that very much is allowing people to ask questions to leading experts, doctors, people with lived experience that they can do in private, because they may not be comfortable talking to their friends, their family, or colleagues. And I think one of the key things is that, you know, if I'd been to the gym last night and worked out of a personal trainer, I'd be happy to tell you that, but I wouldn't be saying to you I had a therapy session about my anxiety or my depression last night. People are starting to do that, and people are starting to talk to friends or colleagues about almost reaching out for help. So it feels like you were almost ahead of the curve in that. You know, you went through your own journey and then made other people aware of how good you felt about it and encouraged them. And these people will thank you for forever, right? I mean,
you know, the decisions that you make, you have to want to make it yourself. It's like, it's not that I had to persuade them. It's just that I led by example, and I would go out to these social events and I would take a sparkling water, and I wouldn't succumb to any pressure about have a shot or have a drink or what's wrong with you or don't be boring. It just didn't work on me, because when I woke up in the morning and I hadn't had a drink or I hadn't taken any drugs, I felt so much better about myself that feeling of waking up in the morning and being like, yeah, you did it again, was like way more powerful than having that drink. The high was way more clean and way more satisfying. And a lot of the, you know, I've got lots of WhatsApp groups and I've got lots of friendships. Look, you know, there's friends of mine that talked me sober, you know, and they're friends for life. But then, you know, those tips that they gave me, and, you know, just that self-discipline, you have to cut certain people out of your life, and you have to cut out routines, and we're just creatures of habit, aren't we? And I think what I'm trying to say here is that I'm not judging. If you drink and take drugs, that's cool. I did it for 20 years and I did it at the highest level. But if you're using it to cope with stress, that's a problem. You know, and there are ways to cope with stress that might actually enable you to cope with it more successfully, like exercise or spending time in the countryside or sitting still, and not doing anything, and just you know, just focusing on your breath for a little bit. You know, you're not in control of your breath and you're not in control of your heartbeat. Something else is, and just being aware of your existence is way more powerful than going and nailing like shots and pints and things like that. It's just sure. Like, I think it's becoming old fashioned, and I think people are realizing that the health, it affects your health.
Definitely.
Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial.
They're all interlinked. And
you wake up in the morning with your credit card bill and you're like, what? Like, what did I do that for?
Yeah, I think the awareness of this is something that's been lacking for years, right? And of course now it's been talked about, we're talking about it now, and the relationship between the physical, keeping fit, keeping your mind fit, you know, whatever you need to do to be learning and educating yourself, and just combining all those things.
Yeah, I mean, look, the pressure of digitalization on human beings is not being spoken about. And the aggressive messaging from the phone, whether it's the news, or whether it's social media, and the imaginary social hierarchies that social media creates, and this idea that having fun is partying. But partying is just getting more and more and more extreme all of the time, and there's no ceiling to it. So the ceiling is you either go sober or you develop a problem with it and you become addicted to it. Now, whether, you know, it's really strange, because you could see a guy sitting outside Sainsbury's with a sign that says, "Please help me," with a can of cider, and people will say, "Oh, look at him, he needs to stop drinking." But you see a young executive buying champagne in Monaco or Cannes or whatever at Mippim. "Oh, look at him, he's doing well." That guy is no different from the guy sitting outside Sainsbury's. Like, he's no different. He's got this addictive personality, but because he's successful making money, you know, he's damaging himself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually every day.
So you just used the word that I wanted to bring into the next question, which is success. So the guy drinking the champagne in the bar in Monaco, if he's not celebrating success, he may well just be doing that out of habit, does it every day because he can afford to. You've clearly got a journey where you set a business up 20 years ago, still running it successfully now. Plus, you've got your work-life balance, seemingly very, very right, very commendable in terms of how you managed to overcome alcoholism 7 years. How would you actually define success?
I think I said it a minute ago. I think that you've got to differentiate personal success and professional success. And I think that acceptance is a huge part of personal success. Accepting who you are, where you're from, who your family are, accepting your past, accepting your current situation, and sort of trying to let go of any sort of unnecessary attachments that you might have that might be slowing you down. And then just sort of like being always consciously aware in your professional career that it doesn't define who you are personally. And if you can separate the two, you'll become more successful professionally and then more successful personally, because you'll be able to separate the two of them. And I'm not saying that I've got this absolutely down to a T, because I haven't. And my girlfriend will tell you, I'm still on my laptop at 10 o'clock at night. My staff will probably tell you I need to stop sending them emails, but it's like I don't know, maybe it's just like the fear of, us missing out on this incredible opportunity with Loft that drives me like, whoa, guys, have you seen what we could do here? But success is an unusual word. I think that the biggest success you can have is accepting yourself to yourself, and always sort of being the bigger person in your personal relationships, and not feeling like you need to be the winner of an argument or a conversation, and really truly mastering how you speak to yourself, like not talking yourself down all the time, not telling yourself lies, like stop telling yourself lies, and stop believing the lies that you tell yourself, and actually really sort of like tell yourself the truth.
Sure.
And just be like amazed at the fact that we're actually all here and alive. And, it's, people, I listen to like people like Eckhart Tolle and people like that. And he said on one of his podcasts that the biggest myth is that we separate I and myself. Like when you're drinking and stuff, it's like, oh, I don't know why I did that. Or I can't live with myself after what I did last night. But that wasn't me. That wasn't me. That was me when I was drunk or high or whatever. But there is no I in myself. There is only one of you physically and mentally. And it's like, if you can sort of like come to terms with that, this is deep stuff, but it's like, if you can come to terms with, you are entirely responsible for yourself and your actions. It's not because of the immigrants. It's not because of Boris Johnson. It's not because of your neighbor. It's not because of anybody else. Your situation is down to you. You know what I mean? And then
take responsibility.
That's success. Like taking full responsibility and ownership for yourself. That is success. And not a lot of people do it. I'm not saying I'm doing it 100% because I'm not, but I'm trying.
No, you've been so articulate as well. And do you know what I love? Is when I asked you that question, you could have easily referred to the biggest contract you got within the Loft journey of 20 years. The different...
Our money is cheap. Like money cheapens success.
But it goes back to what you're saying, which is the relationship between your business self and your personal self. And you literally spent 99%, possibly even 100% of that conversation then, purely on personal.
Like values of monetary values are imaginary.
Sure.
So like, your association to a sandwich from Pret for £5 and my association to that £5, two totally different things, but we all think it's a consistent valuation. It isn't. What real values are decision-making and choices. That's where real value comes in. And the younger kids now that, who are in their 20s, they see money as being cheap as well. And I think that they value stronger decision-making and stronger choices. Like, our generation was all about us. We were so selfish. Consume, make as much money as you can for yourself, buy the big house, buy the big car, whatever. But this was unsustainable, and it's had a massively negative impact on the environment. And I think that, our job as human beings is to invest for our grandchildren. But our generation kind of, we came out of it thinking, well, work hard, play hard. And, we're only here once. This whole YOLO sort of like idea, you only live once. It's true. but what about what you're leaving behind for the next generation, the generation, the generation? And then, you know, the Victorians were building these parks for us to sit in and this amazing architecture. And all we're trying to do is stack it high and sell it cheap, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well said. Do you journal?
No.
No. Have you ever journaled?
No,
What about writing down goals? I'm only asking because it's something that I've certainly done before. And then I even did a vision board and then forgot about it. And this was in 2011. And I did it in a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year capacity. And I found it on my laptop after I'd gone on to set up the business in 2014 that went on to be successful. And it was incredible how many things that I'd actually put down and written down, and little bits that had obviously gone in and then had manifested. But I haven't carried that on. And one of the key things that I'm learning from people I'm speaking to, like yourself, where you haven't journaled from what you just said, but you've got discipline and you've got principles that you adhere to, and they're spinning in your head. And sometimes I think whether it's writing it down or just practicing it every day, everyone's different because you're motivated, you're driven, you're up every day and at it. But I just, not everyone seems to journal.
I think I'm still quite involved in the business. Even though I'm working on the business, I'm still involved in it as well as a sort of brand ambassador, as a representative of the company. The journaling and the vision boards and the plans, like, it took me a long time to take that seriously. But from a sort of financial forecasting perspective about where we want to be and taking a forward view, that can be quite daunting and intimidating for people because a lot of the time people are just getting through every day or getting through every week, and I do think I would probably benefit from doing that. I've mentioned my girlfriend a couple of times, but she journals every day.
Okay.
She journals every day, and she writes a lot. And I always wonder, like, what is it that you're writing? I've sort of got like I don't know. I've sort of got this sense of enthusiasm for taking the brand as far as it can go without having to document it. I can sort of see it now in my mind, but it would be difficult to sort of explain it to you. I think that the long-term vision was to have, starting in South Manchester, supplying student accommodation, to having a fully national property management furnishing solution from a business perspective is where we're trying to get to. And we're not quite there yet. So that will take another couple of years, but we're well on the way. From a personal perspective, in terms of like where I want to be and where I want to end up and what the end or what success looks like or what the finishing line looks like, I just haven't put that into a vision board or anything physical or tangible. And a lot of my friends have done it and they've shown me theirs and they've spoken to me about it. And I don't know, like, I've always just felt a bit like, oh, that's a bit like cheesy or whatever, but
no, that's one, that's a very British thing.
Yeah.
And two, I think it's a very masculine thing. I 100% remember the feeling of almost feel like someone was watching me and sort of laughing when I did it, which I can tell is certainly something resonating with you. And I didn't feel comfortable in the same way that there's so much now, the high five and the mirror and so on, which I'm embracing so much more right now, but there's things I sort of struggle with. But I get that it's a positive thing to open that up. But one thing that really hit home for me about the vision board is it was so materialistic.
Right.
And a lot of those things that I went on to achieve and have and do, it was the lack of fulfillment at the end of it.
Yeah.
And
I'll be happy when.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, like the whole off-grid thing, like creating an off-grid rural co-living community in Wales, Scotland, the Lake District, Portugal, Slovenia, wherever, and having like a brand like Off-Grid where like-minded individuals can come for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, reconnect with nature, talk to people like this and have that. I think that for me is a vision board, if you like, that I am almost sort of more enthusiastic, well, as enthusiastic about as continuing with Loft, you know.
Yeah, you come alive when you talk about it.
It's because because people don't have access to it.
No.
Like it's people just don't have access to the country. Like it's a completely different existence as a human living in the countryside and living in the city, totally different. And if you don't have access to it, you just don't know.
No.
But you have to be privileged in order to live in the countryside, because you have to have a car and you have to be able to afford to be able to do a big shop because there aren't local stores or whatever. It's a hyper privilege. And through converting shipping containers or creating off-grid cabins and being able to sort of fund, inner city schools coming out there, or even my warehouse team, you know what I mean, that I know, don't necessarily have access to a reconnection with nature, would be very satisfying for me, because it literally changed my whole life, my whole perspective. Yeah, it really
for the
did.
positive.
It just made me realize that, we're part of nature, not separate from it.
Yeah.
And this will fuel better choices from a sustainability perspective and from a climate change perspective. The more time that you spend in nature, the less you will purchase single-use plastic, and the less you will eat meat and fuel big agriculture, and all of these things. And this is what happened to me. Yeah, I was like, wow, like we really don't want to lose this. Like, what is it that's affecting the planet the most, and how can I, in my own little way, I'm not fully vegan or anything like that. I will eat a roast chicken every now and again, but I must have cut it out by 80, 90%.
Oh, it's amazing. Well, Benjamin, you have been so open. You've been enlightening in so many things you've said, both about the business and sharing your own journey with alcoholism, mental health. So just thank you so much. It's been really amazing to talk to you.
Thanks. All the best.
Cheers.